Today, I want to talk about an issue that hits close to home. Family and friends who may or may not be part of your social media that have the irrational, illogical, and unreasonable mindset that we see behind the cult like atmosphere of things like third wave radical feminism, social justice, and cultural Marxism. Now, this post here is from my Facebook. Names are blocked for privacy issues, both mine and theirs. All I will let you know is that I'm the post with the green blocked out picture and name. That's my response to their post. Without further ado, let's jump into this post. We can't just let this acquittal pass in the news and forget about it. They're talking about the acquittal of the cop who choked at the guy in New York and killed him. I don't support the decision. The acquittal does not ring true to me. There is clear video evidence that this guy choked and killed this kid, even after this man was saying, "I can't breathe, I have asthma, please stop." But that's not an indication of widespread oppression. It's abuse of power at an individual level. More on that later. We owe it to each other to be honest and discuss the preconceived notions we have and assumptions we make about others. Nothing is going to change if you just search for info and talk with people that support the beliefs you already have. I'm really glad they say this, because if they follow that, then maybe, just maybe, I won't get blocked for my post, though I doubt it, unless I'm severely overestimating their indoctrination into the cult-like atmosphere of social justice. I'm probably getting blocked after they read my post. And to be honest, that may happen to you too if you choose to confront friends and family with these poisonous, frankly, very poisonous states of mind. I have no idea what it is like to be African American, and I realize there are all sorts of silent privileges I get because I'm white. I also have no idea what it is like to be a police officer and the inherent stress that comes with that role. But regardless, let's not pretend racism and sexism and all sorts of prejudice aren't institutionalized in America. I have a whole bunch addressing that. More on that later. Let's not pretend that racism has ended, because if you think that, you're in La La Land and not part of the solution. And if you aren't part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And that's a false dichotomy. And we'll get into that later. One of their friends says, "The more light that is shed on these incidents, the more it will lead to change. We must continue to demand justice." Now, that's a very nice sentiment, but it's so general as to be meaningless in determining whether this person is more social justice or more reasonable. Now, my post. Only Sith deal in absolutes. One can refuse to be part of either camp and instead search for truth amongst the sensationalized and emotional rhetoric. What you are saying were things said by people in the USSR when trying to consolidate power, and in China during the Cultural Revolution. The whole false dichotomy that they enforced. You aren't part of the solution, so you must be part of the problem. Communism. You aren't part of the party, so you must be against it. It's the same idea, and it's very, very insidious, very poisonous. It will lead to widespread discrimination of people. It's McCarthyism all over again. It's reverse McCarthyism. You're too left, you're a pinko, you're a commie. You know, it's a witch hunt. It's a witch hunt mentality. And yes, I realize that I got this wrong. It's cultural Marxism, not social Marxism. Excuse me, I was typing in the heat of the moment. Social Marxism, bracket, SIC bracket, is poisonous, insidious, and destructive. Look at facts. Yes, there are abuses of powers amongst individuals, such as this officer in New York. Some would even say that Darren Wilson abused his power as an officer with the Michael Brown case, but there's plenty of physical evidence pointing to the fact that it was also self-defense. Excessive? Maybe. Who knows? I'm not there to judge that. He definitely acted in self-defense, though, because there's plenty of physical evidence showing Michael Brown reached for his firearm. But the government, which is the institution of the US itself, does not condone or support racism, sexism, or any other prejudices and actively seeks to stop such discrimination. To say that such problems are institutional is patently and provably false. The US has had laws since the 1960s stating that you cannot discriminate against people employment-wise or otherwise based on race, gender, religion, to some extent age, though if their age causes them to be unable to meet a physical requirement of the job, that can be a consideration simply because it's stopping them from a physical requirement of the job. The US seeks to stomp out this sort of discrimination all the time, even though we've got some idiots in Congress trying to roll back the rights that we've given, that we've given words to, rights that people should have from birth, honestly. And, we have words just so people know that they have those rights and they can't be taken from them by power. They haven't gone away, So these rights are something that everybody has, everybody will always have, unless we get some severely abusive assholes in Congress and in the presidency. And honestly, part of this whole institutionalization talk, it's funny. It's a form of projection, because I'm sure if social justice could get into government, they would definitely institutionalize their dogmatic culture, and that would be bad. That would be like communism in Romania and the USSR and China. As a side note, I find the arguments of people like this more repulsive than the arguments of Jack Thompson. And I'll get to that. Jack Thompson claimed that violent video games made people violent. He used faulty science for this, bad science. Because the actual science shows that no, it doesn't increase aggression or aggressive behaviors. It actually, most of the time, acts as catharsis. But Jack Thompson wasn't dishonest like this. The only thing Thompson wanted to do was restrict access of these violent games to young children. And I can actually get behind that idea. I don't think children under the age of 10 should have access to something like Leisure Suit Larry or Grand Theft Auto. And I love the Grand Theft Auto games. I have 4 on my PC. I'm going to get 5 on my PC when it comes out, whenever that is. I have 3 Vice City and San Andreas, all for my PS2. These games are good for people who can deliberate and consciously recognize between reality and fantasy and have somewhat of a moral compass built so that they know that the actions they're doing in game, first of all, are fantasy, and second of all, in a real situation, are wrong. At least a lot of the actions. Some are morally ambiguous, and some are outright, while vigilante and thus against society's laws, morally correct. But Thompson was never dishonest. All he wanted to do was stop access of these games with severely controversial content to young minds. And that's actually pretty reasonable. That's why we have the ESRB. And the ESRB only works so long as the parents are enforcing it. If a parent buys their 8-year-old a rated M game, there's nothing GameStop can do. GameStop goes, "Are you sure you want to buy this for him?" I'm like, yeah, whatever. Out of GameStop's hands at that point. It's in the hands of the parent. Now, if the parent's actually taking a look at the ESRB, oh, this is like a rated R movie. My 8-year-old wants, no, we can't buy this. That's them. They're using the rating system, and that's why the rating system exists. But I thought it'd be a long day before I said Jack Thompson is less reprehensible than anybody else. But honestly, looking back on it, the only reprehensible thing was the fact that he was using faulty science. Secondly, most privileges as a concept do not exist on a wide scale, nor are they universal. I'm going to go into detail with this as well. Privilege is the social justice and radfems see it is pervasive and universal. If it applies to one, it applies to everybody. But privilege, it fluctuates. It's a social ideal for one. Like, and this is going to sound like a generalization, but it's an observation of fact. East LA is stereotyped as being heavily Hispanic because it's true. A lot of Hispanics live there. And if I, a Caucasian male, went through East LA, I wouldn't be at an advantage there. You know, these insular communities exist because they distrust people outside of their culture. And honestly, there are a lot of people outside of their culture that have given them no reason to start trusting. It's a social problem. And one of my friends, who is Hispanic, could go to East LA and would see better treatment in general from the populace there. That could be seen as a privilege, but it's temporary, it's fleeting, it fluctuates. If that Hispanic person came to my hometown, which is a small, stupid town, lots of people with very narrow-minded ways, that Hispanic person would be treated worse than me. Because one, they're not part of the community that's been there. I was raised there, I'm part of their community. If I had just moved in, I'd be less trusted, but I'd still be more trusted than a Hispanic person who had lived there all the time because I'm white, and these are narrow-minded people. But again, it's a social issue. It's not inherent to the entire system. It is not a privilege because it's not to the entire group of, say, whites, like white privilege. And then I go on to point out the only universal privilege. The only universal privilege that exists is wealth. Money gets people out of everything. We've seen it time and again. I mean, there was that case in Texas where that kid killed people with joyriding in a car. I believe he was drunk too. And the judge let him off because he has affluenza. He doesn't properly understand the consequences of his actions because he's rich. That was retarded. However, to say that Caucasian people have it better than African Americans or Hispanic Americans or Asian Americans is to generalize all the populace, which is wrong. For example, according to the model of privilege I've seen touted everywhere, as a white heterosexual male who prefers the sex he was born with, I refuse to say cisgender because that's a word they made the fuck up. They made that word up. I have the most privilege of any person, according to this model of privilege. Yet I cannot find work despite my continued effort. It is harder for me than any other demographic to gain college funding. It's true. Even white women will get funding before white men will. I am more likely to suicide than any other demographic. Also true. Men in general, but, you know, a lot of white men, actually. But that's also a skewed demographic because a lot of people in the U.S. are white. And have attempted suicide 3 times, every time prevented by people other than myself. If not for them, I'd be dead. Personal note aside, in my first video, I do state that I have been battling with depression all my life. It is clinically recognized, but it's irrelevant to the conversation, I guess. And I am seen as a drain on society for a depression I have no control over nor can be medicated for because medication makes it worse. Yes, meds have always made me more suicidal. To say I am privileged is fucking ridiculous. People are individuals. You cannot generalize an entire demographic because each individual within the demographic is different. You have to look at it on an individual by individual basis. Just compare some of the rhetoric you see, hear, and even repeat to the rhetoric spoken by the Soviets before they overthrew the bourgeoisie to help the proletariat. I mean, you know, let's help the oppressed people, all the minorities and the not so able-bodied. Let's help the working man and throw down the aristocracy and all their excess. A case of quote-unquote have versus have-nots. Again, a false dichotomy. Rather than working together to make a stronger middle class, the proletariat low class decided to overthrow the shrinking middle and upper class. In this case, it's going to be, instead of working hand in hand to make social issues even more, I'm not against diversity and social issues being agreeable, but I want it built on logic. I want it built on reason. I want it built on things that are concrete, rather than the concept of, you hurt my feelings, you can't say that. Or, you're white, so obviously you have it easier than that guy because he's black. That is not logical. That is not reasonable. That is irrational and emotionally driven. In fact, talk to a Romanian who lived in communist Romania. I have. That would be V. Monroe. Great channel. Go see it. And he says that everything that is going on with ideas like privilege and social justice in the US looks exactly like the beginning of communism did in Romania. He has, on more than one occasion in his videos, compared the social justice movement in the US to communism in Romania. And he lived through it. He saw it. He saw the end of it as well. He knows what he's talking about. Again, V. Monroe, very cool guy. I'll probably plug him in the description. In fact, I'm going to plug him in the description now that I'm thinking about it. I realize you'll probably block me, just like my sibling did. Yes, my sibling fell to this cult, unfortunately. I tried to have a debate with them, and they wouldn't listen to me, said I was a white, privileged male listening to other white, privileged males in positions of power, which really hurt because they knew I was homeless for 4 years. They knew I've been struggling with depression, and they know that I've tried to commit suicide at least twice. So, yeah, it really hurt when my own flesh and blood decided to go, nope, you're wrong because you're white and you're male. It's like, well, you're white and you're female. How does that make you any different? We were raised the same. Getting emotional here, hold on. Our mother raised us to think, question, debate, test, and explore life. It was not so cut and dry as the scientific method. There was a lot of spiritualism in it. My mother's a very spiritual person. I happen to be an atheist because of my observation of the facts. But I don't begrudge her belief because she isn't hurting anybody with it. She's not hurting herself or anybody else. I don't begrudge anybody their beliefs if they're not hurting anybody or anybody, including themselves. But the fact that we were both raised the same, with the same idea, the fact that my sibling, my flesh and blood, is going to school for law and was on mock trial teams and loved to debate and is still sucked into this cult bothers me to no end, hurts me, and most of all, makes me scared shitless for them. I am honestly scared shitless for my sibling. Scared absolutely out of my mind for my sibling. But I digress. But blocking off dissenting opinions, echoing back to their idea that they should search for info and talk with people outside of their beliefs, that aren't harassing or attacking you, is simply closing yourself into an echo chamber where the only thing you hear is people who already agree with you. That's not how reason or logic works. It's an irrational idea to block off all dissenters. And as I said, unless I'm overestimating their indoctrination into this cult-like atmosphere of social justice, I'm getting blocked for this. I know I am. This is a probability of 95%. But the point was to at least put a seed there. This is somebody who trusted me, and I trusted at one point. I still trust them. I may not trust them with certain issues because of this, but they're my friend. I will never stop loving them. And yes, that's a hippie idea. But I was raised with the idea that love doesn't die. You can't stop loving people. And love isn't just the romantic love you see in the movies. You love your friends. You love your family. You love your wife or husband. You love your children. You love the newspaper guy that you say hi to every day and struck up a conversation with and are really, really cool, really cool friends with. Love never dies. I love this person. They are my friend. And again, this isn't an issue of, well, you need to stop this because it's so bad. That's part of it. It's also, I'm scared. This is not like you. this person here, this friend of mine, another very intelligent, very logical person throughout the time that I knew them, and then I see this, and it bothers me to see people around me abandoning reason and logic, bec- pardon me, because the label looks pretty. And that's really the reason that things like social justice and third wave feminism are more successful than communism was. The label and the surface rhetoric looks pretty. Social justice? What's that? Well, it's wanting to bring justice to all people socially. Oh, I don't want to be against that, so I'll be for it. You know, that's the idea behind the names and the rhetoric. And what they don't realize is that by doing so, what the people joining that read this and go, "Oh, I don't want to be against that," don't realize is that they've automatically enforced a false dichotomy in their head. And that's how radicals get things going. Enforcing the false dichotomy means making a choice, us or them. It's also the reason why I have an issue with names like feminism and men's right activism. Feminism, when not radical, men's right activism, when not radical, both good things. But the names instill a false dichotomy of us versus them. It doesn't make people think, oh, well, this is for everybody. It makes it think, oh, well, this is for women, or oh, well, this is for men, so it must be against the other side. Which is which I much prefer egalitarianism. It's a neutral name, for one. And for two, egalitarianism extends beyond gender. Egalitarianism is equality for all people of all creeds, regardless of gender, race, age, sexual orientation, etc., etc., etc. Egalitarianism is what social justice and such should actually be striving for, but aren't because it's not actually looking for equality. It's a bunch of people grasping for power because they're petulant. Ultimately, this sounds a bit like a rant, and yes, I did get emotional again, especially mentioning my sibling. Uh, it's hard for me not to instill emotion into these videos. Uh, I'm a very passionate person. If you've seen me on any of V Monroe's streams, and again, I'm going to be plugging him in the description. Uh, you know that when I actually do speak up, because a lot of the time I sometimes feel like with all the big names around me, I can't get a word in. I don't feel like talking through them. But when I do get a word out, I'm very, very vehement, very passionate. But I try to remain logical and reasonable. And I hope that enough of my message here has been logical and reasonable, and that's what you take away from it. I realize that anything emotionally said, especially about personal experience, is anecdotal evidence at best. And I wouldn't want you to make a decision based solely on that. So ultimately, I'm going to end this with a good sentiment. It's a modification on trust but verify. It's seek the truth for yourself. You know, if people say things that seem reasonable and logical, and they provide evidence, even like I can provide evidence for a lot of the things I said, especially cultural Marxism. There's sources for that everywhere. And if you want those sources, I will be willing to provide them. But even then, do the research yourself. Read the sources. Make sure you're educated on the issues. Because education on any issue is what leads to a rational, not irrational, to a rational, reasonable, and logical conclusion. Anyway, I'm Xanatrix Adare. Thank you for listening. And remember, you don't only seek the truth, The truth seeks you.